As you can see, we have our keynote speaker. We are so happy to present to you today. As many of you know, in October, we had a gentleman who was here at school when we had our UN Day, but he just sort of snuck by us. And we heard that you were here, and we were a little bit curious and wanted to invite you back to give you your own audience. Many of you have also discussed in class with your teachers some of the accomplishments that Dr. Blix has done for the United Nations and, I would say, the world. And so I'm not going to take a lot more time because I would like him to tell you by himself about his career and how he got to do some great things that he's done. So we would like to welcome you, Dr. Hans Blix.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be with you. I had two sons who went to the American International School in Vienna, and I have two grandchildren who are attending this school, so I come quite frequently up there near Johannes to pick up either one or the two. And I see you milling around and parents meeting you, and it strikes me then how different it all is from my childhood school. You learn already from your school experience that the world is multicultural, multiracial, and multilingual, and that's good. When I went to school, I did not have that awareness. I had not seen an African before I was 20, and I didn't hear many foreign languages until I was also about that age. My grandchildren, now 8 and 5, speak Italian, Swedish, and English. And I read that it is good, actually, for the intellect to get used earlier to several languages. It seems to develop the intellect rather than confusing it. You should be aware, however, that for your careers and professional lives, you need to know at least one language very, very well, to be, as it were, rooted in one language. To speak, to write. My first language was and remains Swedish. I'm much better at Swedish than I am in English. Despite the fact that I worked in English most of my life, and I've written books in English, I still make errors, and I have someone correcting my manuscripts when they are important. You don't need to be perfect, it's not necessary in most situations, but you need to be absolutely understandable. You don't want to have mistakes arising, as when the Swedish foreign minister many, many years ago was better in French than in English. And he was asked about an American what he thought about the American foreign minister's speech at the UN. And he said, I thought it was somewhat offensive. Offensive, well, you don't have to. In Swedish it means driving. It was still too driving. Offensive in English was something different. Such mistakes you should not make. If you do not have English as your first language, you must have it as a good additional language. Today it is indispensable all over the world, and it takes you in lots of places. As a lawyer, I'm sometimes asked, what is the most important thing to know? And my answer is always to read and write. Doesn't sound very much. But the lawyers must be able to understand every word he or she reads and must have significance in every word that he or she writes. That is less difficult. Unless, of course, the lawyer deliberately chooses to be ambivalent. That's another matter. That also happens. Why did I become a lawyer? Well, before I was 18, I thought I would study medicine, as my father and my grandfather had done, as my brother did, and lots of nephews do. But in the period between 14 and 18, I found that I was uncomfortable with chemical formula and physics, and generally with numbers. Labs were not for me, nor engineering. My father, who was a professor of medical chemistry and worked in his lab every day, was a very tolerant and liberal man. He never complained that I had a different interest. When you think about what you would like to do in life, I believe it is important that you learn about the conditions in different professions that you may choose between. You should feel your way, in addition. You should feel your way and feel what you are good at to land present in an area where you have some talents or some strengths. Of course, some things one can learn and had better learn even though one may not have a natural liking for them. There are some things we must learn and be aware of. Building up your physique is essential, especially if you are not a natural athlete. You are going to live in your body, perhaps another 80 years, and so you better make it strong and healthy. I confess I did not like physical exercise. I was chubby, as I am now, and I hated most sports. Only when I was grown up did I begin to compensate this by my lack of school sports with hiking and walking in Lapland and in Austria. Well, better late than never. I think it did strengthen my health. If you find it too boring to develop fitness, at least make sure that you don't undermine your fitness and your health. When I was at school, smoking was prohibited, but I did smoke, and I continued until I was about 28, when my father told me some statistics about the health consequences of smoking, and then I quit. This was pretty long ago, and I haven't taken it up since then. Alcohol and drugs were not really present as temptations when I was at school. If alcohol were invented today, I suspect it might be prohibited, because the social and medical consequences of alcohol in society are tremendous. However, it is not prohibited, and the attempts to prohibit it have been very negative in the US and other places. And those of us who use it, and I use it, we must be prudent in our use. Never lose your head. It can be very risky. One should never feel obliged to drink. When the great Indian leader Nero one came to his first state visit to Moscow, at the reception they offered him vodka, as the Russians would do, big trays carried around. He looked at it and said, "Juice, please." And thereafter they served him juice, and thereafter, ever thereafter, they served trays of juice to people. Statesman became. I mentioned that my poor talent for chemistry and math took me off thoughts of becoming a doctor. However, my aversion to those subjects were somewhat balanced by the joy of finding attraction in other areas: literature, drama, history, and philosophy. I realized that I had a much better relation with letters and arguments than with numbers and formula. With like-minded kids, I helped to organize discussions, clubs, and amateur theaters, as you might be doing in your school. So I left school in 1946 with a liking for literature, theater, philosophy, and a strong longing, in addition, to see and know the world that had been closed because of the World War that raged from 1939 to 45 when I went to the school. And that was now again open in 1945. I longed to see it. As I left school, my interest pointed to a diplomatic profession. Travels would be free of charge, and long stays would be possible all over the world, all over that, filling the world that lay outside our borders, and what I wanted to see. For that career, for the diplomatic career, you needed an academic degree, for instance in law, plus very good language skills. So I joined the law faculty in Uppsala University, and I managed to get a job one summer as an intern in a firm in Paris, in France. And I did learn French that I have had use of all my life since then. I didn't write it well, but I can manage speaking it. I confess that in Uppsala I found many legal subjects tedious. The law of real estate, for instance, I thought was as dry as the cement of the buildings. Administrative law, I thought it reeked like the dust of archives. Some insight areas and some areas attracted me very much, however. I came to understand something about the function of law in society, that it was not primarily to serve as a basis for judgment in courts, but rather as a way of telling citizens how to avoid conflicts. The simplest example is the rule that you should drive on the right side of the road. If we did not have that, we could have many conflicts about never should be on the road. So you don't go to court mostly for that, but you avoid any conflict. And so it is with most rules in society. They give you guidance where to go. They avoid law. The rulemaker has thought it out in advance, what can the conflicts be, and this is the line that we decide upon. That I learned. Another lesson was that procedure in courts and in administration should always be geared to finding what is legally relevant, what is important to your conclusion, what is significant among the myriad of facts described in documents and in testimony. A lot of things come in, and you have to pick that, what is this relevant for in deciding the case. And we did all the time in heaps of data and information. We always drowned in it. And it is useful to have acquired the habit